like crazy place at the moment, and I look around at people in my life and think there's a lot of pain and suffering, and how do we look at that and think like, well, we're praying and nothing's really happening, so what do we do with that? So I was just thinking about all this, and then I was actually thinking, what do I bring to this? What's my view of unanswered prayer? What's my experience? And I was just thinking about it, and then God brought it to me last week, and I didn't really want to share on it, but he's encouraged me to this week. So a little bit about me is when I was 10, my dad had just left our family, and I found myself pleading with God to bring him back and change my dad. I wanted Jesus to magically fix everything, and when that didn't happen, I was so mad and started to wonder where God was in all of it. We were good people. Why did something bad happen to my family? These feelings stayed with me for many years as I went through my teens, unable to see any hope in the pain that had happened and had been caused. But deep down, still praying for it all to be fixed, and those prayers going unanswered. So today, I will be looking at how am I going to get through this. So that's the topic name that I was given. And looking at how Jesus got through the worst moments of his life, in particular, Monday. Oh, thank you. I shouldn't cry anymore, it should be fine. In particular, Monday, Thursday, Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Monday, Thursday is a busy day for Jesus. It is the Last Supper. Then he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane. He is then betrayed by his close friend, which leads to his arrest. Then all his friends run and hide, and one of his closest friends even denies that he knew Jesus at all. In the garden, it feels like Jesus is right on the edge of a total breakdown. He says, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. This is a moment of complete mental, spiritual, and emotional collapse. Jesus is absolutely at his most vulnerable, and yet he's amazing and intentional too. Every step of the way, he makes such clear choices. So there's a lot that we can learn from Jesus here and how to handle dark times in our lives." If you have a Bible, go ahead and turn to Mark 14:32. In Mark 14, Jesus has gone to the Garden of Gethsemane to process his own emotions in prayer and to wrestle with the will of God. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," he said to them. "Stay here and keep watch." Going a little further, he fell to the ground and prayed that, if possible, the hour might pass from him. "Abba, Father," he said, "everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not my will, but what you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Simon," he said to Peter, "are you asleep? Couldn't you keep watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Once more, he went away and prayed for the same thing. When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. They did not know what to say to him. Returning the third time, he said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Enough, the hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." There are 4 important choices that Jesus makes in these verses, 4 keys which can help all of us in our own times of despair. I did do a little PowerPoint, but actually didn't finish it, so they were all going to come up on here, but I've forgotten, so you might have to write them down. The first is Jesus goes out of his way to pray in a very particular place. So the first is place. After the Passover feast, he headed out into the night to pray in a particular place that he loved. Grief can be disorientating, and it is wise to seek the comfort of familiar places in the midst of chaotic moments. Other than Gethsemane being a nice, peaceful place to pray, it has prophetic significance as well. Gethsemane actually means the oil press, and had a giant oil press on site. So Gethsemane was a place of pressure and literal crushing. Jesus says, "My soul is overwhelmed. He is also being crushed spiritually." Verse 35 says that he fell to the ground to pray, and Jesus is being crushed emotionally. He's just being betrayed by someone he loved and trusted, and he's begged his 3 best friends for help, but instead they've let him down. There's no one on earth who can comfort Jesus in his loneliest hour. Jesus is also being crushed physically. In Luke, we are told that his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. So we see Jesus caught in the extremes of mental, spiritual, and emotional, even physical torment. Some of you might have been crushed in many of these ways, in your mental health, in chronic physical pain. Maybe you have been betrayed by people that you have trusted, or feel that you have been abandoned by God. Some of you might even feel overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. But the Bible shows that God of the universe has suffered similar things. He's not indifferent to our pain. In Hebrews 4, verse 15, it says, "We do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weakness." And then Isaiah describes the Messiah as a man of sorrow, acquainted with grief. In this, we see that Christ suffers with us. God does not leave us to suffer alone. Psalm 23, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thy art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." We always want God to fix our problems straight away, and whenever he does, we call it a miracle. But mostly, instead of fixing the problem, he joins us in our distress. The next key is people. Jesus seeks out certain people in his darkest hour. He wants his 3 best friends by his side and makes himself vulnerable to them, telling them how he's feeling and asking them to support him. I know in my own life, when I'm feeling overwhelmed, I really want to self-isolate and pretend everything's fine. That impulse to kind of cover ourselves, to hide. But when life is tough, there is no shame in being weak. We need to tell people it's okay not to be okay. Jesus shows us here in this story how important it is to lean into our friends, to tell them honestly how we're feeling, and to ask vulnerably for their help. Jesus here in the story doesn't just tell every single friend. He narrows the circle to 3. So don't make yourself vulnerable with everyone. Just open up to a few people that you really know you can trust. So the first key to processing difficult times is place, and the second is people. The third is prayer. Having enlisted his friends, we're then told that Jesus went a little further. He fell with his face to the ground and prayed. The temptation to isolate ourselves from others in times of trouble can also apply to our relationship with God. Our friends are essential, but ultimately they're insufficient. One clear word from the Father can bring more clarity and comfort than 1,000 words from friends. Peter the disciple says, "Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you." The Apostle Paul says, "In every situation, present your request to God, and the peace of God, with which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." And the final key is purpose. Every step of the way throughout this story, Jesus finds purpose in his pain. Earlier during this Last Supper, he'd said, "This is my body broken for you." So there's a clear purpose in the brokenness. Hebrews 12, verse 2 says that Jesus was able to endure the cross and to scorning its shame for the joy set before him. His suffering was terrible, but it had direction, it had context. But what about when something awful happens and someone you love dies in a freak accident? Surely we can't say that is a higher purpose. Psychologists say that it is important when processing pain to find meaning or purpose if we possibly can. To find a purpose in spite of the pain can be a source of healing and hope, refusing to let it define or deplete you, finding a way of turning the ugliness into something beautiful. I'm not saying this lightly. It may take a very long time, indeed, even just to be open to the idea of there being anything good at all that could possibly come out of your heartbreak, but it will help if you can. Only really in my adult life have I really seen what God did in my pain and suffering, as I have taken time to reflect on it and found the purpose in spite of the pain, like the people God brought into my life who have loved me like a daughter, and the empathy that was cultivated in me at a young age. To care for people who are hurting, and also the building of a strong relationship with Jesus, who has blessed my life beyond anything I could have imagined back then. I now see the prayer I specifically prayed appeared to go unanswered, but what I now see is God's will for my life was not necessarily my will for my life. His will is way more important than the things of this earth. Romans 5, we know that the suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. Do you feel like you have been through an olive press? I know how I felt that at times, of great pain and suffering. In Jesus' day, olive oil wasn't just used for cooking as it is today. Olive oil was also used in lamps. It was a source of light. This important resource for cooking food, lighting homes, curing diseases, maintaining worship and anointing kings could only be acquired by crushing the fruit of the olive tree to a pulp. Without intense pressure and the destruction of something good, there could be nothing better. Jesus that night in Gethsemane, being crushed to become the light of the world, the healer of nations and the anointed King of Kings. So we can learn 4 keys to coping with despair from Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane: place, people, prayer, and purpose. Jesus isn't just dying for us, he's suffering with us. And we can find a purpose in the pain when you can, and find a purpose in the pain when you can, and find a purpose in spite of the pain when you can't. And just as the band come back up, I want us to take a minute or two to reflect on an area of suffering you have experienced. Consider ways in which you have been able to find or might be able to find some kind of purpose in it or in spite of it. And then I'm just going to close with this prayer. Lord, help me to stand today. Temptations and trials abound. When life hurts, I get confused, dishonest, suspicious, and critical. I put on the belt of truth. When life hurts, my relationships suffer, especially my relationship with you. I put on the breastplate of righteousness. When life hurts, I either get really lazy or I make myself really busy. I put on the shoes of the gospel. When my life hurts, I let down my guard and leave myself exposed. I take up the shield of faith. When life hurts, my thinking gets negative and I question everything. I put on the helmet of salvation. When life hurts, I'm a coward. I take hold of the sword of the word. Lord, it doesn't feel very finished down here. I don't feel very finished. See me kneeling, help me stand.